Hello, I'm Denshi, and this is the desktop operating system tier list, which, unsurprisingly, has me ranking desktop operating systems in tiers. I've got a bunch of them here. It's mostly Linux distributions, but there are some extra things added like macOS and a bunch of Windows versions. So let's begin. This will all be in alphabetical order, and obviously it's a subjective ranking. It's not any kind of objective reality that this is better than this, although there is some truth behind some of my choices. So anyway, let's begin with Android x86. Now, obviously this operating system isn't designed for desktops, but it still is a desktop operating system, and I know a couple of people who run it on secondary machines for running Android apps for some reason. Now, I can't run every single Android app, which obviously isn't, a very good thing, because the whole point is having that compatibility with Android apps, which is really surprisingly hard to get on many machines. There's very few good emulators, both for Linux, macOS, and Windows that can run Android programs. Android x86 gets a B. There's nothing really explicitly bad about it besides the lack of compatibility with certain apps. It's relatively a well-made operating system. It's nothing special, but it's nothing bad, so it gets the center B. Next is, oh boy, Arch Linux. Arch Linux is known for being very, very simple, but not very easy, at least in terms of the install process for new users. Arch Linux is known for its, by the way, I use Arch phrase that people who use Arch Linux use, although I've never actually heard anybody who uses Arch Linux use that, besides in the context of the joke. This is an S tier very, very easily, and I'm not saying that because I run Arch Linux. I'm saying that because Arch Linux has many things about it that make it very good, like its rolling release. That means you get the latest packages all the time. There's no waiting 6 months for a new version or whatever. It's always got the latest packages. It's got the cleanest packages, vanilla stuff. You don't get like a special version of a desktop environment that's made exclusively for Arch with an Arch theme or whatever. It's all very vanilla and stock, and it's a simple Linux, system, GNU system, whatever. It's very well made, and if you are an advanced Linux user, it's probably what you run, because it's very, very good for advanced users. It's excellent. Moving on to an Arch-based distribution, Artix. Now, on one hand, it's good because no systemd, but on the other hand, no systemd. And that's a problem because you can't run a lot of daemons which you can run on Arch. It's the exact same as Arch besides that, just that it has a different init system. So that's the piece of software that launches what are essentially services or daemons in Linux. So instead of using systemd, it uses OpenRC, Runit, or S6. I don't know, it is very, very, very good as a distribution. It's very, very excellent if you don't need that systemd compatibility, but just because you can't run all the daemons and it's, OpenRC and Runit have some things about them which not all users like. I personally quite like them, but, that gets an A tier. I'm sorry. A for Artix. This is an interesting one. Few people talk about this distribution, and it's very, very sad that few people talk about it because it's Bedrock Linux. Bedrock Linux is a Linux distribution that isn't really a distribution per se. It sort of is, but it isn't. That's put together a bunch of parts of different stuff, just smash it all together. Like, this part from Debian, this part from Arch, this, and just like cobble it all together into one big distribution. And you get to choose what to cobble together. It's very loved on the Unix, customization subreddits and such. I don't know why people like it so much. I give it an A tier because it's not a real perfect distribution, because it's not nothing about it that's really special. However, it does have a lot of potential. Debian is the base. It's the big distribution. It's what everything's based off. At least most distributions are based off Debian. And Debian is, let's face it, it's old. It's got that, I think it's 6 months or every year. I don't really know. But it has a release schedule. It's not rolling release. And it's got older packages. And they have like Debian versions, Debian 9, Debian 10, Debian whatever. They have Debian Unstable, which has some slightly newer packages. But besides that, it's a lot of old stuff in the Debian repositories. However, it does come by default with only free software. You can enable non-free software repositories, but it's only free software when you install Debian, unless you choose to plug in a firmware DVD or whatever. So that is a plus. It is a very, very useful distribution if you really know what you're doing and you really want to push that pure stability out of your system. And I think it's big enough and it's created enough, it's had enough of a legacy to warrant a nice S tier right there. So there goes Debian. Deepin. I only really put this here along with Elementary OS because these distributions are unique because of the desktop environments, which is, this is the desktop operating system tier list, and a desktop environment is a key part of an operating system, unless you're using a window manager or whatever, but whatever. Deepin, it looks very nice. Some people think it's Chinese spyware. it's not Chinese spyware. It still does look very, very nice. It's got a lot of aesthetic to it. It's got consistency to it. Deepin's is generally designed very, very well, as in the desktop environment. The actual OS itself is basically just Ubuntu or Debian. I can't remember exactly what it's based off, but there's nothing special about it specifically. I think it gets an A rank for just generally being a very good desktop environment on a relatively mediocre distribution. Elementary OS, based off Ubuntu. It's also got Pantheon, its own little Linux desktop environment. Obviously, the first thing you think of when you see it is, oh my god, that looks exactly like macOS. It's got this very crazily well-designed user experience, and I think that warrants an A rank. We got a lot of A ranks, but don't worry, things are gonna get downhill when we reach the Windows and Mac OS sections. EndeavourOS is based off Arch Linux. It's a Linux distribution that doesn't really have much going for it. All it really is an installer that installs Arch Linux for you, and you get to choose the desktop environment and some packages or whatever, but there's nothing really special about it, I feel. So that warrants a B tier. Because once again, like Android x86, it's not bad, but it's not exactly super good. It's got nothing really special about it. Fedora. Fedora is a Linux distribution based off Red Hat, quite funnily enough, because Fedora is a hat, Red Hat is a hat, so, you know, funny. It's 6 months for new packages, I think. It's like 6 months for every Fedora version or whatever. It's generally well known as a desktop operating system. Linus Torvalds uses it as his desktop operating system. I'm gonna do a little bit of a hot take right here. I don't like Fedora. I don't like the package management in Fedora. It's relatively slow, and I generally don't like that it comes with GNOME and Wayland by default. GNOME and Wayland are great, but most people who install Linux aren't gonna be using GNOME and Wayland. Or at least maybe GNOME, but not Wayland. Definitely not Wayland. Wayland's a display server. Some Xorg programs won't run. Most will, but some won't. GNOME is luckily very well optimized for Wayland, but it's still not perfect. So I give Fedora a B tier. Freebsd. Oh boy, this is a fun one. Now, obviously, this is a desktop operating system, thing. If this was server operating systems, this would be a completely different story. But FreeBSD as a desktop operating system does not have a lot going for it. It has poor software support, doesn't really run much that Linux can run, and it's generally something I wouldn't use, and it's something I don't recommend people use. Using BSD on the desktop is very rare. It is the base of Mac OS, which gives it some merit, and it's a very good Unix system for a server or something else, but if you're running desktop, don't use it. That's our C rank. It's something I genuinely do not recommend for desktop usage, simply because I don't really think it's made for it. Anyway, Gen 2. I'm gonna automatically put this in the S tier. Why? Well, Gen 2 is hard to install, but it's all built from source, and that's part of the Gen 2 experience, sort of. It's for Linux users who are super advanced and want to have this super complicated install. Well, complicated, like long, it takes a long time generally because you gotta build everything from source. It's got so much customization, use flags with every package, all the stuff, emerge, the cool stuff about Gen 2. And the fact that you build everything from source means you know all the source code, unless you install binaries, but still, you know all the source code. So you can know that everything on your system is clean. So Gen 2 gets an S rank for being a very unique little distribution. LFS, Linux from scratch. Is that even a desktop operating system? No, not really. It's not at all. Why? Because you don't actually use it as you can't install LFS. It's a guide, it's documentation on how to make a Linux distribution, how to make your own. And that warrants it an A tier. It's difficult to use, and I think it warrants A because, let's be honest, you're probably not as good as making a distribution as the people who made Arch are, or the people who made Debian are. You're probably not that good. You might think you're good, and you might be very good, but you're probably not that good, so you can't get it done as well as them. But it's a very worthwhile thing if you're looking into doing it. Linux Mint. Linux Mint is highly accessible. It's a well-made distribution based off Ubuntu. It's like Ubuntu, but with all the bad stuff removed, sort of. It doesn't have any of the annoying snap packages and all that annoying stuff. And it has a great desktop environment called Cinnamon. It has a lot of cool stuff about it, and I recommend it for new users if you're not gonna go with the rolling release, to go with Linux Mint, because it has everything out of the box as well. That warrants it yet another A tier. Oh boy, we have a lot of A tiers. Mac OS. First of all, before I wreck it, let's take a look at the positives of macOS. It's a Unix system in terms of being able to do things like, running Unix commands using a shell that's Unix, I think it used to use bash, now it uses ZSH, a bunch of cool terminal stuff that you can do, brew install, all that kind of stuff. But on the other hand of macOS, it does have a very closed and strictly controlled ecosystem, which some people like, because, oh my god, I buy this device from Apple, I run software from Apple, it's all optimized, it's all great, it just runs it. But the thing is that first of all, you pay like $1,000 for a garbage laptop from Apple. The MacBook Air, for example, $700 for a $200 laptop from like 5 years ago. That's their hardware that they have inside them, ridiculously overpriced. Part of the actual operating system, the point of it is that you're using the Apple experience or whatever, you're experiencing the Apple way. But a lot of times the Apple way is just taking away the permission to do certain things in your system and just taking away features as well. macOS lacks a lot of really obvious stuff. An example is desktop audio capture. macOS doesn't have desktop audio capture built into it, at least for third-party applications. I haven't checked QuickTime. I even think QuickTime can't do it. But if you're using OBS, gotta install a separate program just so you can get desktop audio capture to work on macOS. It's ridiculous. So that, I think, warranted a C tier. I'm sorry, macOS users. It's a very stable operating system. That's actually a really good operating system. If it wasn't for the fact that you basically can't change anything about it, I would give it a B or even an A tier. But because it's restricted to a specific set of Apple-only hardware and it's got a bunch of stupid restrictions, I have to give it a C. Manjaro. Oh boy. Manjaro is very good. It's based off Arch Linux. It's got a great community, great forum that recently shut down for no reason. They reset the Manjaro forums. I don't know what that's about. All the pages are gone, all the support pages. I don't really know, so that's a downside. But I think it's the best distribution for beginners, and it's what got me into Linux, so that goes into the S tier very easily. Parabola. Parabola is just Arch Linux, but with only free software. It's very, very good if you only want to run free software, because you can sit there and you can essentially have all the benefits of Arch. The rolling release packages, vanilla packages, the relatively simple configuration, very bare bones system that you can have, but only free software, so no proprietary blobs. And that sort of deletes the purpose of Arch, in my opinion, because the point of Arch is that it's easy and simple. And part of being easy and simple is not having to, enable non-free repositories. I want to run this, I want to install this piece of firmware or whatever for my Bluetooth card. On one side, I'm like, yes, free software operating system. On the other side, I'm like, defeats the purpose of Arch because it's supposed to be simple and, straightforward and no stupid stuff. So, it does have a really good guide from transitioning to Arch to Parabola. If you're running only free software, then I recommend, Parabola. But for me, it gets a B tier for just only having free stuff, just sort of defeating the purpose of its parent distribution. Pop OS. Pop OS is a hard one because on one hand, based off Ubuntu, it's not rolling release, but it has very up-to-date packages for what it is. Comes with very up-to-date packages, has a great user experience, great installer that it has, NVIDIA Optimus drivers built in, just install it. I've only ever seen another distribution that has that. Install it and it just works on NVIDIA laptops. Oh my god, works instantly. But it has all the drawbacks of Ubuntu. It has, relatively complex system, and there is the benefit that a lot of guides for Ubuntu work on Pop OS. So that stops it from being perfect. Gives it an A tier. Because to me, because Pop OS has a little bit of focus on gaming, that means that it is sort of counterintuitive to not having being rolling release, because gamers want to play video games. And if they can't play the video game because they need this new version of wine staging, and the only way to get it is to build it from source using Pop OS and not having access to the binary on the AUR of wine staging or the wine staging binary that's in the Arch repositories, that's gonna annoy people. Solus. Solus is a fun one because Solus, I think, used to have a little bit of promise in it. What it was just a freshly made Linux distribution, not based off anything. I don't really know if there's anything highly special about Solus. I think it uses systemd. It does have its great budgie desktop environment, but the lead dev left it, and I don't think it's gonna be surviving for a long time. So yeah, I don't recommend Solus because it might die unless people pick it up. So I'm gonna put that in the C. Ubuntu. Ubuntu's fun because Ubuntu is what a lot of stuff is based off. If you thought Debian had a lot of stuff based off it, well, Ubuntu is based off Debian. So much stuff's based off Ubuntu. And when I say Ubuntu, I'm counting in all the Ubuntu family, Kubuntu to Xubuntu, all the different desktop environment variations. Let's be honest, Ubuntu is doing a lot of bad stuff. Well, Canonical's doing a lot of bad stuff. You know, snap packages, a lot of people don't like them because they're garbage. They're too big. They take so long to launch. They're generally annoying. They blow it up the system. Oh, we're going to have Amazon spy on you in the software. And even just having opt-in, I think you can disable it in the installer, but it has, by default, the spyware, the telemetry, turned on. So I think that warrants a C tier. I'm sorry, Ubuntu fans. If you want to have Ubuntu, just use Pop! OS or whatever, or Linux Mint, because Ubuntu, because of Canonical and other things, I could never see myself using it. Void Linux. This is a hard one. Like Debian, Void Linux only ships free software by default. I used it a lot, actually, mostly so I could learn about run it, and I could run it on some, older systems, because there's 32-bit versions of Void, and it's one of the few distributions that actually offers 32-bit versions. There is Arch 32-bit, but it's not official. It's fan-maintained. Void Linux is very good for promoting a lot of good things. It has LibreSSL, so a type of SSL that's completely free software, and it uses Runit as opposed to Systemd. And once again, has Systemd, doesn't have Systemd, it's like a debate. So I think that warrants it. It's hard because it lacks a lot of that package support. It does have some pretty niche packages in its repositories, including things like the Olive video editor and that kind of stuff. But besides that, it's not something I could see a lot of people daily drive. So I'm gonna put it in the B tier. I'm sorry, B tier. It's something that, I could see people using, but it's nothing that I would recommend explicitly. Unlike the C tier, which is stuff that I do not recommend to use. Windows 10. Windows 10 is spyware. Everyone knows that, but most importantly, it's the most popular operating system that's currently in existence in terms of desktop operating systems. I don't know if iOS or I think Android's the most popular single operating system, but Windows 10. It's set a lot of bad precedents. It's generally bad. It's unstable. It's got those horrible Windows updates that nobody likes, those nasty things. It's got a lot of viruses for it. It's got a lot of bad things, and it's generally worse. Not really worse, but it's worse than most Linux distributions, and it's still using, like all Windows versions, that old Windows NT kernel code. Sure, it's been updated, but it's still the same code, and it's not very good, being closed source and all, and just being antiquated. It's not very good. I think it deserves a C tier. I don't exactly recommend using Windows 10, so I'm gonna put it lower. However, it's not fully trash, because you see, Windows 10 has one thing that keeps it from becoming a D tier operating system, and that is the amount of people who use it. There's so much software for it. If there's a piece of hardware, there's probably drivers for Windows. I don't know, a piece of software, there probably is a Windows version. It's got good backwards compatibility with its older software. Although you can't run 16-bit and 8-bit applications. I don't think there are 8-bit Windows programs, but 32-bit programs just run out of the box. 16-bit programs might have to use an emulator or whatever, but still, it's a very well-made operating system from the point of view of having legacy support, and it may be an awfully made operating system technically, but it does have the advantage of having that huge amount of people who use it and that huge amount of software which you can get for it, even if most of it is viruses. Alright, so Windows 7. Windows 7 is older than Windows 10, obviously, but it does have some advantages to it. Like, for example, the fact that it doesn't have as much spyware, or the fact that it was discontinued, so it's, less likely to even have spyware anymore. However, it is insecure, and I wouldn't really recommend it for daily usage. I don't really know, because putting it in D means that I think it's garbage, but I don't think it's garbage. I think it's okay, but the problem is it doesn't have that Windows support, which is what kept Windows at the C rank. So I'm sorry. I'll just give it C. I think C is a fair score for Windows 7. Windows 8 was garbage in terms of having that start menu nobody liked and a bunch of other technical issues. It introduced Windows for ARM, which was key in terms of Windows' development for ARM CPUs. But besides that, I don't really know. It's better than Windows 10 in the regard that it probably has less spyware, but it's got that garbage start menu, so I'm going to put it in the C rank. Windows Vista, this is very, very quickly D rank right there. It's very unstable. It's not really very unstable, but it's not really meant for a lot of computers. If you're going to be running Vista, then you could just be running 7, because they have basically the same hardware requirements. It had a lot of issues at launch, and it still has a lot of issues. I know there's people getting out there trying to and make tools for Vista, stuff that still works on Vista, but can't run software. Here's a controversial one. Windows XP gets a D rank. You can't run software on it anymore. I know there's some operating systems out there, some software out there that does actually run on Windows XP. There's people trying to, make more tools to keep on using Windows XP. Drivers are awful. You gotta install everything from a USB or something. Can't really, you don't have Wi-Fi drivers or internet, even just LAN drivers not included in the operating system will screw you. You gotta get a DVD out so you can just install those, and then you can go download the other million drivers which you need for stuff. Have you ever actually done trying an install of Windows XP? Super impossible. Basically impossible to do on modern hardware because it won't run. It's not really an option. I love Windows XP. It's the second version of Windows which I ever used, and it's something that has imprinted on me heavily, but that bias doesn't carry on if the operating system itself can't be installed on modern hardware and you can't use it, and we're judging these based off being usable. So Windows XP doesn't count, really, just gets a D rank. So I hope you enjoyed this video of me ranking a bunch of operating systems and shouting about Linux. Goodbye.